Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics need counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko, joined, as always, by my good buddy, Dr. Issues.
Hello, everybody.
You know, I kind of miss it that you don't do the fun little comments or the little asides anymore. You stopped doing that after, like, issue 5 or 6. I kind of miss them. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I admit that I had some ideas. Some of them fell flat, even in my own head, so... You know, I didn't want to waste people's time. But to be honest with you, if people want to come up with some ideas and email us or connect on Twitter, I'm more than game to come up with some cool intros.
Well, I was going to say, I don't think the fact that anything has ever fallen flat or not been funny stopped us from making jokes in the first place. I think this show, if nothing else, is loaded with horrendous puns and poor turns of phrase and just really, really bad jokes. I mean, the Mr. Freeze was filled with bad jokes. Just last week with, you know, we had a couple with Legion that were just, you know, really, really corny puns, but... I'm all about corniness.
Okay, I'm going to let you in on a little secret then. My original idea, I unfortunately gave away and I didn't want to repeat it. I was going to talk with everything as if it were a question and do that for the first 2 minutes. But I thought that would get a little irritating.
That would get irritating after about 15 seconds. So thank God you didn't choose to do that. But that's a little hint as to if you didn't, you know, listen before or you didn't know who this week's issue was based on. It is based on The Question, Vic Sage. Before we get into that, as always, you can check out this episode and our show at capesonthecouch.live and through the Libsyn network. We are distributed to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. You can find us on Twitter. You can check out our Facebook page. You can email suggestions to Doc Issues about his intro at capesonthecouch@gmail.com. You can subscribe to our Patreon page, patreon.com/capesonthecouch, where you can subscribe at the $1, $3, $5, or $10 levels. So hello to all of our patrons so far, Mom, Brian, and Robbie. You guys are awesome and rock. So getting into this week's issue, this week's featured guest is The Question, Vic Sage. The Question was created by Steve Ditko in the Blue Beetle #1, June 1967 for Charlton Comics. And this is the first, I'm pretty sure this is the first non-DC or Marvel character we've done.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Yeah. Ultimately, The Question is a DC hero now, but he didn't start off as a DC hero. He started off in Charlton Comics. Steve Ditko, a very objectivist in his philosophy, really kind of out there and interesting. If you really let Ditko go full Ditko, his characters can be kind of difficult to read. The Question, as Ditko wrote him, was pretty understandable and pretty solid. So Vic Sage was an investigative journalist, and he used Pseudoderm, which is a fake skin and a spray can, to cover his face, and it basically permitted him to investigate things that Vic couldn't do without being exposed.
You know, technology is a wonderful thing. Biotechnology is a life-saving thing. We do have the ability to create artificial skin, to, you know, do grafts for people that are burn victims, all these wonderful things. They don't come in spray cans.
There is a spray gun. There is a spray gun that allows it, and it's using stem cells, and you can regrow your own skin within like 48 hours. And it's absolutely amazing technology. There's a very amazing video on YouTube, and you just watch this and you go, I didn't know this was a real thing, but it is a legitimately real thing. But it's your skin. They have to cultivate the cells, and it just replaces. It doesn't go over your face. It doesn't cover anything up additionally. But, you know, it's comic books. So I think it's a pretty cool idea. So one of his frequent foes is the Banshee, who's a flying circus performer. Essentially, he really wasn't about crime fighting per se. He was more of a corruption fighter. And to the extent that any people were involved in corruption, Vic Sage is going to find them and out them And so that was his way of fighting evil and crime, but it wasn't so much the, hey, I'm going to put on a costume and punch bad guys kind of crime fighting. It was more on the street level, investigative, which I think gave him a little bit more of a gritty realism, the pseudoderm notwithstanding, is he could go after people and things that your average reader could certainly relate to. And I think in the late 60s and early 70s, corruption was certainly a big topic, at least amongst American readers, with Watergate and all of the things going on there and the Vietnam War. So I think having a hero that fought corruption and the evils in government was very cutting edge or cutting right to the heart of what the American zeitgeist was at the time. So it was very finger on the pulse of the culture in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, definitely the spirit of the times, I would say. I think it's incredibly gutsy, though, because if you ever get into a situation where you have more words than artwork in a comic, that would have been the opportunity. It didn't end up that way. I mean, they ended up regular comics, but man, oh man, the diatribes that they could have gone on.
Yeah, and for Ditko being the objectivist, he did really like the sound of the writing of his own philosophy. And further to that point, by the way, creating a character that is very focused on issues of the day and can be very timely at that moment, but it can get dated real quick. And if things change, if the culture shifts, you can very easily end up with a character that's stuck in a particular era. And I think it's a testament to the question and the people who have worked on him that you can take those ideas and that concept and continue to evolve it and grow it and work it into whatever is happening now. And I think certainly an investigative journalist that cuts into corruption and checks into those kinds of things is not an issue that's going to die or become irrelevant anytime soon. I think just by virtue of human nature, we're always going to deal with corruption, and who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The Shadow knows. We could do an entire episode just based on the Shadow, and we may add him to a later episode. So Charlton Comics gets bought out by DC in 1985. And here's an interesting note. Charlton Comics and their characters were originally going to be used by Alan Moore in Watchmen. So that entire series was going to be based on the Charlton characters, and what eventually became Rorschach was originally the Question. But DC editorial said, we have plans for these characters, and we see the pitch that you're giving us and what you want to do with them. We're not going to let you kill off all these characters that we just spent all this money buying, because we want to use them in the rest of these books. So we're not going to let you use them in this 12-issue miniseries. So Alan Moore said, fine, then I'll come up with my own characters. And that's when he created Ozymandias and Rorschach and Dr. Manhattan, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it ultimately behooved everyone involved that he didn't use the Charlton characters, because we would have been deprived of the Question and Blue Beetle and all the Charlton characters that have permeated DC Comics and the amazing characters that Alan Moore created for Watchmen. So I think it really ultimately worked out for everybody.
Yeah, there's a fine line between saying that comics are a product. I mean, you have to sell things, you have to make money, but at the same time, it's an art form. And the best thing for everyone involved frequently is to let the artist do their art.
Yeah.
So.
And also, it's also said often that the best creativity comes from restrictions, and that's, you have to work around those restrictions, and that's where you really get the out of the box thinking. So by taking these characters away from Alan Moore, he was forced to come up with a more original story and more original characters, and that's what we ended up with. And I think that the legacy of Watchmen, we talked about that in the Rorschach episode. So in 1987, The Question gets his own solo series by Dennis O'Neil and Dennis Cowan. Again, he's still the investigative journalist. Now he's focused on rooting out corruption in Hub City, which they later said was based on East St. Louis. And he learns martial arts from Richard Dragon, help him fight better. So he's a little more of a skilled combatant, because by virtue of his investigative journalism, he's constantly getting into scrapes and coming up against people who don't want him to know the truth about what's happening. So he finds this woman, Myra Fermin, and she's very good-hearted and she's very noble. And he has an on-again, off-again sort of relationship with her as Vic Sage, not as a Question. She never really puts the two together until much later on. And she runs for the mayor's seat, and she initially loses, and then she ends up winning because her opponent dies. after his on again, off again with Myra Fermin, he has a relationship with the Huntress because he starts working in Gotham City, and that's where they sort of interact. And that's touched on in the Justice League Unlimited series, animated series, which I think just did an amazing job of boiling down the essence of that character. And we've gone on numerous episodes and talked about the amazing work that Tim Dini animated universe in the Batman, Superman, Justice League Unlimited, Batman Beyond, those series that were created by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini.
Since you touched on the fact that restrictions often can offer the opportunity for the best creative art, this is an example where having animated series meant that they were on a tight budget, a tight deadline, and basically they have to make these wild out there comic book characters become regular people that happen to have abilities or motivations or whatever the case may be. And I think that is why we ended up with, ironically, that bleeding back into the comics, where they realized they didn't always have to go so far out, so esoteric in what they're trying to address. You can relate to people on a regular basis while still having extraordinary things happen. So I think that's the crux of why, and to be honest with you, our age as when we first interacted with these shows, we were impressionable, and that probably plays into our bias. But I think people recognize that these were incredibly well done with what they had available to them, because they recognized if you connect with human beings first on the most basic level, you can start going off wherever you need to.
I think that speaks to comics and fiction, certainly in general. But, we're not going to get, as you said, we're not going to get that esoteric. So Vic Sage discovers he's dying of lung cancer. I don't recall whether or not the Pseudoderm played any role in that, and the fact that he's constantly spraying it on his face and then breathing it in. I don't remember if that was, discussed as a possible cause. But anyway, so he begins to train Renee Montoya as his replacement. And she was known throughout the Batman comics as one of the detectives in the Gotham City Police Department. And so he begins training her as his replacement to take over after him. And this is pre-New 52. So the New 52 comes along and that reboots the character. Now there's a couple of different questions. We're not going to get into necessarily all of them. The one version is he's a government agent who's recruited to help Amanda Waller run the Suicide Squad. And I really like this. At one point, he manipulates Black Manta into seeing everybody as Aquaman so that he does a better job at killing them. That's a manipulative bastard par excellence. That is some genius level stuff. Just, see everybody. And I remember that was done in the one Justice League. Was it the DC cartoon or whatever it was, where I think it was based on the Tower of Babel, where they injected some sort of like nanites into Wonder Woman so that she saw everyone as an enemy. And I think it was Cheetah. I think she saw everybody as Cheetah, and she had to constantly fight to the point that she was exerting herself and she was going to end up dying from overexertion. This was, again, part of Batman's plans to cripple the rest of the Justice League in the event that he ever needed to, except those plans got out. But a very similar concept that you see everybody as your enemy. Well, now you just constantly have to fight them. So brilliant move on the part of Vic Sage and Amanda Waller. So Grant Morrison created an Earth 4 question, and then this one was kind of similar to Mr. A, who was really Ditko, going full Ditko on the objectivism. The Earth 4 question, he's very similar to Mr. A, and he's also similar to Rorschach. He's kind of a murderous vigilante. For the crux of this discussion, though, we're really going to talk about the classic question, the one that originated in the Charlton Comics and then most of the pre-New 52. And then to the extent that I was also able to watch some of the Justice League Unlimited, and I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, I was like, oh no, I have to watch Justice League Unlimited as part of my research. Like, how horrible it is that I have to watch this amazing show just so I can relearn the characters. Damn, it's an awesome show. So, Doc, you and I talked about this beforehand, when we were prepping the show, and you said with the question, it's 3 Ps.
Absolutely.
For the issues. You want to lay those out for us?
Sure. 3 Ps: paranoia, privacy, and philosophy. I'm going to take each of those in order. Paranoia. Okay. The idea that people are against you. They're out to get you. It's a conspiracy. The idea that not just that people don't like you, because sometimes people say paranoia is like, well, you're hated or whatever. No. It's
they hate us because they ain't us.
It's that it's planned. It means that people are taking purposeful steps to prevent your personal goals. And unfortunately, it can often manifest in ways that aren't just unique to one individual. What do I mean by that? If you have a neighbor that doesn't like you, it happens. That's life. If you decide, and yes, I said decide because this is the person putting their own spin on society, that neighbor is involved with other people that are making sure that your lawn is now 100% destroyed at every possible opportunity, even though your lawn is green. In other words, even though you have information that indicates what you're saying is wrong, you have made up your mind to the point that you have everything, quote unquote, figured out. That I know exactly what's wrong. And the problem with paranoia in general is there is nothing that I'm going to do about it that's not going to be destructive to somebody else. In other words, we've all heard the saying, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. I mean, yes, we've had situations where people have had altercations because it was true animosity. But paranoia is kind of a one-way street, and that's where it creates a problem. Meaning, I know that you're a problem to me, but somehow you don't know it. And so when I come and confront you about my conspiracy involving you, usually the person's taken aback because where did this come from? It came from the other person's mind, but there's no way they would know that. And it creates incredibly strange dynamics because now the response by the other person can be one of acceptance, meaning, wow, everything this person says is true. How did I not know this? And then they feed into it. Or it's usually much more questioning, not trying to use the character that way, but they're going to confront back. They're going to say either I don't know what you're talking about, or unfortunately, people do use pejoratives. They're like, you're crazy or what? And no one likes their reality tested. And that just snowballs into more and more animosity and chaos. And the person now using what we would call soft evidence, not hard evidence. So they're trying to pick up cues from other people. They're trying to pick up environmental cues that may have nothing to do with what they're talking about, and they're incorporating it into their conspiracy theories. It's something that can just overwhelm the person. They create their own reality. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to win a game that somebody else created and didn't tell me what the rules were.
That's very well said. And there's no way to win that game, to the extent that it can be said that it can be won if they're setting the rules and they're the only ones who know it's in existence. I think by definition, you lose. And furthermore, I don't think the person creating the game ever actually wins either. It's a game that's designed at the start that's lose-lose. At least from my understanding and my experience with it, it's lose-lose from the get-go. So it's always a problem.
Right. I can say that from experience, and I'm not talking full-blown psychosis with other factors that lead to a diagnosis like schizophrenia or anything like that. Okay. And like I said, skepticism or criticisms of things in life is totally normal. That's fine. Makes sense. Don't take everything at face value. That's understandable. But when you go past that, it leads to opportunities that things can get worse. For example, you pointed out it's a lose-lose situation. But what if the person with this whole conspiracy mindset thinks that they've won? Then where do they think they are compared to everyone else? They're going to put themselves on a higher level. They become grandiose. It's not their fault that no one else can figure this out. And conversely, let's say that they think that they're losing. They're always in a losing battle because everyone else, be it Big Brother, be it whoever,
Illuminati. Right,
whoever it is, they're the ones that are always in control. So they're always holding you back. They're always holding you down. You know, that's going to put a permanent, forget chip. That's going to, that's going to put a whole workshop on your shoulder. You're not going to be able to handle even the slightest disagreement because it's going to be manifest as, once again, the man putting you down. That's too much pressure for me. I don't want to have that mindset. And unfortunately, we know that there are things, and I'm not trying to start a war online with this, but because I know we're going to get comments about it, but we know that there are certain substances that can put people in this mindset if they're susceptible to it. And that's incredibly dangerous because that means that person may not even be aware of how their mind's being altered and how they're starting to process information. And to be honest with you, if you are susceptible either through family history or genetics or whatever the case may be to developing a more full-blown psychosis, this could be the tipping point. So it's not something to be taken lightly. It's something that can be lived with. Plenty of people have this mindset, and it's not a problem per se because at least they still get the bills paid. They still go to work. They still go to school. They still have family that loves them and they love them back and all that good stuff. But it can go too far. And that becomes a situation where people start walking on eggshells because they don't know how to handle this person, or that person takes their thoughts too far and act out in a way that society doesn't view properly. But hey, we see this all the time on the internet, right? You can look up plenty of websites, plenty of pages and, all sorts of things if you really want to waste a lot of your time.
So moving on to the next issue, privacy. And I think this one is very interesting because it highlights how Vic is a hypocrite. So if you want to get into that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. For the sake of someone that's investigating something, and thank you to police officers and detectives and private investigators for what they do. They do a great job. For journalists, all of it. Getting information that is sensitive is something where you really do need a certain level of anonymity, or if not anonymity, at least having allies that are going to protect you from people that are willing to retaliate. Believe it or not, that's directly relevant to my job, because working in an emergency room, there are times where family members will give information about what's been going on in a patient's life, but they don't want to be identified because the patient is going to retaliate against them. So I think privacy is incredibly important, and I think it's something that should be respected. Having said that, the issue with the question is that he takes that and uses that as somehow the liberty to go ahead and invade other people's privacy. So I understand that he wouldn't want to be caught out as a journalist that happens to be on television and giving all of this valuable, secretive information just to make sure that people feel safe or to get better results in society and in government and in business. That's all well and good. But did you stop and think about the people that you're affecting with how you got that information? I'm just doing this as a general statement. If you broke into someone's house, rifled through all of their paperwork, accidentally lost their will, but you found this one little piece of information that indicated at one point they took a bribe 20 years ago that has no relevance to anything going on right now, what did you accomplish? I'm not trying to go Machiavellian on this. I'm not trying to say the end justifies the means. This is a situation where if you value something for yourself, you should at least be able to value it for everyone else as well. So if you're really fighting for the protection of people's rights, then you have to do it in a way that actually protects their rights. And this is incredibly relevant today based on what we've had happen. Everyone that has an email address has had their mailbox, if they've ever subscribed to anything, flooded with what? Do you know what I'm talking about with this?
We've updated our privacy settings.
Thank you.
We've recently updated our privacy policy. Hey, did you know we've recently updated? Hey, this account that you haven't logged into in 5 years, we've updated our privacy policy. So I didn't even remember I was subscribed to this site. What the hell was I doing even joining it in the first place? Yeah. But they've updated their privacy policy because of GDPR.
That's right.
So that is an absolutely huge thing.
Yeah, it's something that we are taking more seriously as a society because we recognize we went too far. We recognize as a whole that we wanted things done quick. We wanted things done cheap or free, and we wanted it done in a way that was going to yield positive results for us individually without consideration for anyone else that we were going to interact with. So I'm not just blaming the question for this. I'm saying that we as a society have to do better with it. I appreciate the fact that someone would be willing to take a risk to themselves to help others. I think that is incredibly noble. I don't think it's worth it, though, to ask that of other people that never wanted to be involved in the first place. And that's what the question seems to be doing in many of these situations.
He's forcing other people to make the sacrifices because he's willing to make the sacrifice.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an issue. It's a problem. And it is difficult when you said earlier that he reinforces his own privacy, but he neglects that of others, and I'm reminded of that famous exchange from I know it's the cartoon, but, Supergirl is upset and you went through my trash? Please. I go through everyone's trash. Like, that's who he is. And he doesn't see anything wrong with that. But yet he doesn't want anybody to know who he is. He doesn't want anybody to see his face. He's just the question.
That brings up the point because he's dealing with other superheroes, or as Rorschach would say, costumed heroes. Many of them have, their secret identity, but amongst themselves, they do find the wherewithal for the sake of their own sanity that they're going to confide in one another about who they are. Not all of them, but many of them. The question abuses that, basically. And that, to me, just doesn't sound fair. We understand that no one should be a complete island unto themselves, but my goodness, man, you don't have to, go to everyone's little island all the time and try and dig up everything you could find. That's counterproductive at some point, because I think what it ends up doing is it ends up merging the trivial with the vital. You don't know what's important, one thing versus another, because you're just always looking through all the muck.
Well, his argument would be to counter that, because at least when you were saying that, I know it positive. I don't know what's trivial and what's important until I have all the information. And then you can judge relative to what it is. The issue is the question takes that upon himself to decide what's trivial and what's important, and doesn't respect the individual's right to say, this is important to me, this is trivial. But again, I understand to some extent it's relative. It's all relative. What's important to you may not be important to another person, but he is not the sole arbiter of what is important and what is not important, because in his mind, it's kind of all important. Everything is part of the grander scheme, the grander conspiracy at play. So to segue that into your third P and the philosophy, again, created by Steve Ditko, who was personally an objectivist. And this is one of those instances where the character ends up becoming sort of a creator avatar, so to speak, and the mouthpiece through which Steve Ditko could espouse some of his very objectivist philosophies and beliefs. I think it was tempered later on when other people got a hold of the character, but when Ditko was writing him, certainly it was different. We'll put it that way. I don't want to necessarily harp on anybody's belief system, but Ditko's is certainly one of the more out there.
You know what? Before I give my input, I actually do want to hear your explanation in terms of Ditko, because I know that's something that you definitely mentioned in terms of how he created this, because I think it'll give a better overall view for what I'm about to say.
Well, no, it's just the sense that Ditko has. And I don't want to speak ill of him because I've certainly never met him, and I don't like to talk about people that I don't know. But Steve Ditko has become sort of a hermit over the years and isolated himself from the creator community by virtue of his philosophies and his personal belief system. And I think that's mirrored in The Question. And The Question isolating himself from the rest of the hero community, Justice League Unlimited notwithstanding. I think it's a situation where The Question really wouldn't. He's not the type who would willingly join those kinds of groups because he would want to be isolated, because it gave him that distance and objectivity to judge everything else. Because as long as he's removed from it, he can observe with a better understanding. It's hard to see things if you're in the thick of it, and I think we all understand that. So Ditko's philosophy, and by extension The Question's philosophy, is that I'm going to distance myself from everyone and everything so that I can judge accordingly and have that objectivity. So that's kind of my take on it, and I don't know how you want to take it and run with it, but at least that was my version of Ditko and The Question.
Absolutely perfect setup, because I certainly appreciate the idea that you want to come up with the best decision with the information that you have at hand at any given time. How you go about accomplishing that ends up influencing the people that are going to be involved in that decision. I think it's ludicrous to make those decisions without the input of the people that it's going to impact. The way the question ends up being written many times, okay, I'll give one major issue. Killing. Okay, there is a period of time, the way he is written, he doesn't kill. But the reason that he gives, not the basic killing is wrong, which in all honesty, that's pretty much what Batman does. Batman is very simple schema in the sense that don't take innocent life. And there have been a few times where that was great to say, well, I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you. That was actually done in one of the Batman movies, which I think people can relate to that. But the way that the question always described why not to kill, it was more like, well, is that the greatest expenditure of my efforts at this moment? Because there are so many other problems that are going on within the political system that I shouldn't just focus on this one person. Like, wait a minute. Wait. You just went above and beyond what any human being would recognize as being core to what we are. You didn't have to go that far. You took it to a level of complication that's going to ultimately create more problems, because if you're going to do that just for that one person, you're going to do that almost every time you have to make a choice. And you're just going to get bogged down in your own head trying to figure all this out. So ultimately, the way he's written, he does have it figured out, and he does use the schema, and he does have decent results, but nobody else knows or can relate to what he is saying because, dude, you created this out of thin air in your own head. Can you bring us in? Can you just level with me here so I can at least understand where you're coming from? But that's not the way he views it. Why would he? You don't have to when you see everything, right? When you have the total picture in front of you, why worry about one individual in that circumstance?
He's too busy looking at the forest to see the trees.
Exactly. He does make the exception. And that becomes his protege. Now, the thing I wonder about that is, was that something that was necessary for him just to keep going? Because often, people that have that total objectivist view, as you've already said, end up being less productive because they just can't foster the basic human elements of relationships. Don't get me wrong. They're still breathing. They're still alive, but they're not living. We're social creatures. And I'm saying that as an introvert. I draw energy from being alone. I understand that. But if you told me that I had to be completely alone for the rest of my life, I don't think that's an enjoyable experience. And I don't think someone that's 100% objectivist would think that either. Or at least they wouldn't admit it.
Well, I don't think you ever have to worry about being entirely alone because you and I are the yin and the yang. You're introverted, I'm extroverted, and you draw your energy from being alone, and yet I'll suck all the fame and energy and attention away just so you can be you. And honestly, I kind of do that with other people. I noticed that, at least me as an extrovert, one of the things that I like to do is I like to make sure that people are comfortable, and I want them to be the truest version of themselves that they can be. But I have a lot of friends that are introverted. So how do I do this? And I have honestly, consciously given this thought. I will intentionally make a fool of myself or be the loud, brash, outgoing type person, because then the attention is focused on me. And then it frees up all the introverts that they don't have to worry that the spotlight's not on them. And yeah, to some extent, I may be doing it for my own personal gain. I'm not going to lie. It's fun being the center of attention. I don't need to be the center of attention all the time, but I like it. But the point is that if I'm in a social situation with a bunch of introverts and they're like, they're wallflowers, they're standing off on the side, I know that I can see it because I've talked to them. And again, at least amongst my friends, I'm certainly not speaking for all introverts, but I've talked to them and I've said, why don't you do this? Well, I want to, but I'm shy. If I'm making a fool of myself, then they can have that joy and experience in knowing that they're free to be themselves because the spotlight's not on them. So that's where that comes from. And that's why I don't mind being the extrovert to your introvert. And ultimately, everybody wins. It's symbiotic type relationship, to bring it back to our first episode with the Eddie Brock. It's a symbiotic relationship. I take all the attention out of the room. You feel free to do whatever it is you want because you know nobody's looking at you. And at the end, they have a fun story and they can go home and tell, their friends, oh, I was out with Anthony and he was being loud and crazy and let me tell you this fun story. And then I don't care if I'm the subject of your fun stories as long as you have a fun story. And, that comes from, I guess, some semblance of security and understanding of myself. I don't care if I make a fool out of me. I don't care if I do or say something stupid because I'm okay with it. And you can't embarrass me if I'm okay with it. And that was a really long diatribe that had nothing to do with the question, but other than the sense that, we're all social creatures to some extent and we all need some type of interaction to survive. And the question, thinks that he's above it.
Right. Exactly.
Except when he doesn't.
Right. And to be honest with you, I guess what I was saying there was I don't have an explanation as to why that particular exception to his rule happened. I mean, I guess you'd have to ask the writers about why they decided to go that route. But I would like to think it's because deep down, everyone knows you need to have some sort of interaction. Otherwise, what's the point?
Well, my response to that was going to be, you could argue that, and there's certainly something to be said about that. You could also argue that he feels much like, again, Rorschach, and I know that there's a lot of corollaries between Rorschach and the question because Rorschach was originally supposed to be the question, that he believes in the ideal more than the man. And that he understands that the notion that someone has to take this mantle on, even if he physically can't, even if he personally can't be the one to do it, someone has to take this role and someone has to follow. And if he's dying, and he's certainly aware enough to understand I'm dying of lung cancer, even though he lives in a universe in which it's filled with many people with extraordinary abilities, any one of whom can get rid of his lung cancer and make him healthy or bring him back from the dead when he dies.
I'll give a counterpoint, and I know this is a tangent, people. Give a counterpoint to that. One of the most powerful and rich, influential people in the world, Lex Luthor, died of cancer in the DC universe. So it's not as if it's this total thing that could be hand-waved. He came back. Okay, fine. Never mind.
But my point being that he understands that someone has to be the question. The question is not Vic Sage. The question is an ideal. The question is a symbol, and Christian Bale, Batman, talks about that in the first the Batman Begins movie. He's talking to Alfred on the plane. He's like, as a man, I'm alone. As a symbol, I'm powerful, I'm uncorruptible, et cetera, et cetera. That, in Vic Sage's mind, that's why he's passing it on to Renee Montoya. Not because he believes in everything himself, because he knows that Vic Sage is mortal, but the question, that idea, can live on beyond him. So that's why he takes her under his wing and makes him his protege, not because he wants that relationship. Partially it could be that, but it's because he believes in his ideal so firmly that he needs someone to carry on after he dies.
Okay, that's a fair point.
So moving to the treatment then, in universe, how do you treat someone who is so paranoid that everything is part of a conspiracy? Because I don't think you're going to get much engagement since he's going to think that you're one of them, whoever them may be.
Well, I'll also add this complication to it. Half of what he says is right. I mean, you're in a comic universe. There are a lot of people that are manipulating a lot of different other people to get certain nefarious gains. In general, I think what I would focus on more is, and since we spend so much time talking about it, might as well utilize it. Who are your connections that you trust? Because you gotta have somebody. You're not telling me that you're traipsing all over the world doing all of this legwork yourself. Is it Huntress? Great. Is it Montoya? Fantastic. Is it Batman, as in the Justice League universe, where it's all? I love that quote when they first mention the question in a round table and everyone groans and he says, "I know he's wound a little too tightly." For Batman to call you that, man, oh man. But anyway, I digress. The point being, let me see if I can focus on the fact that he has that level of trust with some people. And I would really start to piece, why did he develop that trust? There was a reason. It might have been purely because he noticed that they were the people that got the most information. Okay, fine. How did you observe that? And that probably would get into some creepy stuff knowing him. But the point is, all right, you've established that there must be some 1, 2, 3, I don't know how many people that aren't in on it. Otherwise, why would you even have the interaction? And not only that, and this is true with most conspiracies, it creates this idea that there is someone or some group that's involved that is all-knowing and incredibly intelligent beyond our understanding, because that's the only way certain things would be able to happen. Because if you know it, wouldn't they know that you found out about it? Wouldn't they be able to take that information ahead of time and act on it so that you wouldn't be able to destroy their plan? What I just said, that was what, 30, 40 seconds? That's something that would probably take years to have this person develop that level of trust to even have that dialogue, you know, just to kind of break through just a little bit, you know, to let them know that, you know, this might be a little out there. But if that's what needed to be done, so be it. Heck, I'll take it a weird way. I might send a private note, like anonymous, that so-and-so wants to help you, and see if he could track me down. Because if he could track me down, that would mean, hey, you're as good as you say you are. But then that also means you've done the research and you know that I'm not in on it.
Or are you?
But then why would you come there? Because you would know if I were in on it, I wouldn't allow you just to walk in, right? Unless I knew that something was happening. See how this just really could cycle in on itself. And you know what? To be honest with you, it's not much different out of universe.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know, you know, because, again, aside from his training, the question doesn't have any powers per se, other than just a persistence and a desire to ask questions, for lack of a better term. And conspiracy theorists and paranoia are certainly things that I think we can all understand. We've seen, as you said, you can go on the internet and any number of websites and you can find out conspiracy theories about myriad subjects, whether it's 9/11, the Kennedy assassination, the moon landing, et cetera, et cetera. So there are folks like that out there. How do you deal with them? How do you get them to understand that, as you said earlier, it's okay to question things? It's certainly okay to say, well, I want to dig a little deeper. But at some point, you have to hit ground. But how do you determine when that is?
And that's an incredibly difficult inquiry. What I usually focus on is, how is this affecting your day-to-day life? Because any other challenge above and beyond that becomes a fight, like an actual battle, back and forth about details, many of which you're not going to be privy to because you're not living that person's life. Now, if they're talking about the, you know, like the really big conspiracies and things like that, okay, fine. They'll probably give you websites or literature that you can read on the subject about how they feel about it, which can be beneficial because it gives you their perspective. But if we're talking about the baseline stuff of, I know that my town hates me and it's because they don't pick up my garbage on time and they blah, 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 then it becomes much more of an issue of, okay, and get to the emotion. How does that make you feel? Well, yeah, I get really pissed off. Like, oh, yeah, I could understand that. Does it get to the point where they, you know, and creating exaggeration beyond what a person with a paranoid conspiracy, if you go beyond what they expect, you actually will pierce through. So in the example I just gave, like, oh, really? So has it gotten to the point where they started banging on your door or something, or throwing the garbage like at your house and all that? Like, no, not at all. I'm like, okay, well, all right, that doesn't sound too bad then. So you're saying that it's late? Like, I mean, you mean like they make you put it out late? Like, no, like, okay. So what is the effect? Like, how is it harming you? Tell me that, you know? And if they don't have an answer to that, then you've kind of temporarily quelled that part. See, that's the other thing. I'm not going to lie and say, oh, yeah, you just break through and they realize everything is wrong and they're relieved of the pressure of the paranoia. It's always there. It's a long slog. But the point remains, you focus on little pieces here and there to make sure that their quality of life is as good as it can be for them. And what they recognize as quality of life. People usually always, for the most part, consider their family to be a positive part of their life. Okay. Are they doing something to your family? You need to know that because the patient will do anything to protect their family if they think someone's acting against them. If it's not at that level, great. Enjoy your family, go on vacation, have fun, do things together. Just anything to distract from this intense burden of the idea that the world is against you. If it's more along the lines of, okay, well, is it affecting your job? No, my job's my solace. I don't have to worry about anything. Those people are great. Fantastic. As long as it's not a burden on you, can you work overtime? Can you, or are you looking to do better at your job? Are you looking to get a promotion or a raise? Have you discussed that? So another technique, meaning distraction. You're trying to get them away from just constantly thinking about this. There's so many techniques that you just employ time after time just to make sure that the person understands you can still get through this, because there's the ultimate, and this is definitely an exaggeration, but I'm telling you, I've done this in the ER. We have cameras in the rooms because we want people to be safe. Tell that to a person that's paranoid, thinks that the government is spying on them. How do you think they react to that?
I don't think that goes over too well.
It doesn't. So here's what I do. If I think it's something that is immediate, and you can tell that it's immediate with that person, that is going to be a hot button issue, I will introduce myself. And if they bring it up, I don't purposely bring it up myself, but if they bring it up, I say, oh, you mean that camera right there? And I flip the bird. Why would I do that? Because that tells them it's obvious a camera is there because people are watching. Now, if I do something that's that incredibly offensive, what would happen if people were purposely trying to put us in harm's way? Oh my God, that's a threat. What on earth is this guy doing? Boom. Tons of people be rushing in, security be rushing in, we'd be escorted out and taken to wherever, whatever's going on. And magically, how many times has it happened where security has come in and taken me down? What do you think?
I'm going to go with 0.
Exactly. That's a direct example for the person for something that they're thinking of in the moment. That's incredibly powerful, and it buys time. Once again, I am not claiming that dissolves it, but the idea is you just keep going with whatever you can, and you help them process whatever is going on in the moment. If you
like we said last week with Scott, you make progress in small bits and pieces wherever, or 2 weeks ago, and then we were discussing last week that the fallout of that. Mm-hmm. You make progress where you can, when you can. You try to move forward as best you can under the circumstances.
Right. And I'm not belittling anyone about this, because people actually have had horrible things happen to them and things that were horrible plots by other people. It's recognized. Talk to anybody in New Jersey about the mafia, and it's not a joke. Just to give a random example.
It's not a joke. I had family in the mafia.
So, the point being, because I'm just going to totally deadpan that, the point being, it's okay to have a certain level of skepticism, paranoia, whatever you want to call it. I don't care about the phrasing of the words. I don't care about the lexicon. All I care about is, how is it affecting you in terms of your functioning in life? And no matter what, I hope that you're having the best life you can. That's it.
I think that's words we can all live by. Try to live your best life. I don't really see anything wrong with that philosophy in general, certainly not as it applies to your average person. And then also, people like the question, people with paranoia.
And one other thing I want to say, because if you look in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and I want to make sure if this comes up, if people mention, okay, smarty pants, are you aware that there's something called paranoid personality disorder? Are you aware that there's something called delusional disorder? Are you aware? Yes, I'm aware of all of that. The thing is, I'm talking so much about these techniques, and I'm not talking about medications like antipsychotics, because for the most part, they haven't been shown to be that effectual. So, it really is a matter of just talking things through over a long period of time. That's the mainstay. And do it in a way that's not meant to be adversarial or confrontational, because any other pattern, for the most part, is just going to set you up to fail to get punched in the face.
Yeah, punched in the face is a bad thing. So with that being said, now we're going to corral Mr. Sage, and we're going to get the question on Dr. Issues' couch. And God help you, Doc. This is, I think, going to be one of your more interesting patients. But you ready?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Let's bring the question in here and see what happens when the question is on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, question. I'm Dr. Issues.
I know why you're here.
Oh?
Yes, you've been sent by the Girl Scouts. They think they can break me. but I know the truth.
And how do you know that?
By asking the right questions, unlike you.
Okay, so educate me.
Why would I bother explaining this to you? You're either part of it, or your mind couldn't possibly understand how deep the rabbit hole goes. Either way, I'm not wasting my time.
Okay then, you figured out my role in this puppet show, so where are your strings? I mean, you're not the marionette, right?
I don't have strings. I have scissors.
Okay, so tell me one person that you've cut free.
Renee Montoya. She's going to continue my work after I'm gone.
Wait. By definition, that means that she should have already figured it out. She's free, right? So, I mean, what other work is there?
Freeing others.
Okay, well, I'm right here, so you don't see the value in freeing me? It's your opportunity, hero.
I'm not a hero. I'm just a man asking questions. And I can't free someone who's content to stay in the cage.
Okay. Look, I don't think we see eye to eye on this.
Is that a face joke?
Whoa. Look, sometimes I'll admit I try to inject humor to see the response, but that one was accidental.
Nothing is an accident. That's all part of a larger plan, even if you don't get it.
Okay, then you tell me. Was that a face joke?
I'm the one who gets to ask the questions.
Look, I'm a psychiatrist. I ask questions too. We can take turns on this, you know?
Or I can stay here in this physical cage, and you can stay stuck in your mental one.
I know what you're trying, but you really don't know how to tell others how to break out of a mental cage. Unless they agreed with you to begin with. Montoya was someone that studied you.
If that's your takeaway from this, we're done. Come back when you have better questions.
I'll come back when I think you have better answers.
Well, that was a bit of a head trip then.
I'm just going to call it a stalemate, and to be honest, that actually is pretty common in these circumstances.
So who do you think you got through to better, him or Rorschach?
Well, I came away from Rorschach questioning my view on the world. With the question, I was cemented in my view of the world, so I guess I win?
All right, that's fair. I can respect that. So that's going to about do it for this week's episode. So next week, we've got The Sentry, and then we're going to do Hank Pym as a sort of a tie-in lead-in to the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie. And then the week after that, Casey Jones from Ninja Turtles. So if you have a character that you want us to do, you can subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/Capes on the Couch. At the $10 a month level, you get to pick one character a month for our show, and we will guarantee to answer any questions that you have about that character. You can also subscribe at the $1 level and get a shout out. $3 gets you early access to the episodes, plus a monthly blooper reel, and $5 a month gets you all of the stuff before that. Plus you get access to a uncensored longer version of the skit. You can find us on our Facebook page. We've got a Twitter account, Capes on the Couch. Doc and I also have our own individual Twitter accounts, Anthony Sitko and Doc Issues. And you can email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com. You can find this episode on our website, capesonthecouch.live. We are distributed through the Libsyn network to a number of platforms: Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. And I think that about covers all of the necessary wrap-ups. Again, please like, subscribe, and leave a positive review on the show if you like what you hear. And we love the audience feedback, good or bad, because it helps us grow, it helps us learn, and helps us to create a better show for you, the listeners. So, Doc, anything you want to add?
Well, I mean, you know that everyone was already listening to this, right? It's all a part of the plan.
The plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces are called aglets. Their purpose is sinister and unknown. He was just so great in that show, man. He seriously was.
Yes.
Watch the Justice League Unlimited. I don't think it's available on any streaming. At least it's not on Amazon and it's not on Netflix. It was on Netflix at one point and they took it off. But if you can find episodes, watch them. They still hold up. It's brilliant. It's absolutely amazing.
Are you saying that there's another way to obtain things?
I am not in any way, shape, or form advocating any illegality. Please download our show legally. It's free unless you're subscribed on Patreon. But I'm not advocating any illegal behavior or websites or anything of that nature. No, sirree.
Right, because you don't want them to know.
Exactly. Sure. Let's go with that. So for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.